Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. While you're waiting, we're going to put up a poll. If you could please select your answer and press submit, and we'll reveal the answer a little bit later on. We've got a pretty tight time frame this morning, so I'd like to say good morning everyone and thank you for attending our forum on the dairy industry. My name's Lillian Parker and I'm your host for today. I'm with the DPI Land Use Planning team, and today we're going to start our first series of industry forums, and these will be held over the next 12 months or so. These industry webinars have been developed in response to the surveys we conducted last year during the paddock to planning forums, and we've been overwhelmed with response again today with over 100 people have registered, and we currently have about 60 people online. So I think we'll get started. We have last chance to put your response in the box, and we'll get back to that again later. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge country. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of various lands on which we meet today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the land and waters of New South Wales. We've just got a few housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website for those unable to attend today, or anyone who wants to look back over the presentations. Please stay on mute during the presentations, and if you haven't done so already, please add your name and your organisation onto your Zoom profile. The questions can be posted in the chat throughout the forum, and we'll be answering them at the end. If we have a bit of extra time and you want to ask a specific question yourself, we will invite you to raise your hand. It just depends on how much time we have left at the end of the presentations. We also have the ideas wall, which some of you that have been in our previous forums will have used, and you've got the opportunity to put any comments, issues or challenges onto the ideas wall. The link will be in the chat. We incorporate this information into internal government responses and policy, and I really encourage you to use this feature so that we can be using these ideas and collating them for future use. And as I said, the recording and other relevant resources will be made available on the Paddock to Planning Social Pinpoint page in coming days. We'll give you the link at the end of the program. So on to today. Today we have Zita Ritchie, who's Acting Leader Dairy in DPI, and we also have Rod Cooper, Chair of the Dairy Action Plan Implementation Panel. They're going to provide us with some background on the value of dairy farming to our regions and to the state, and they will also describe the range of projects being undertaken by the industry to reflect changing farm systems and to future-proof the industry. So now I will hand over to Zita, and we'll have a couple of little polls just to start off so we understand who's in the room and what your understanding of the industry is today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lillian. So just before we kick off, if you could just answer those questions on the screen there, it just gives me a bit of an idea of who's in the room and the level of knowledge of the dairy industry. Yeah, so if you're able to click one of those responses and submit, we'll show that up in a second. Okay, so yeah, we've got people in the room with mixed level of knowledge, which I was expecting. So I think the majority have a limited knowledge. So I'm hoping that today's session will provide you with a bit more of an insight into the dairy industry and some of its key features and challenges and opportunities that we're looking at. So thanks very much for that. For the next question is around, I guess, the motivation why you've joined to today's webinar. Yeah, Helen, if you're able to put that one, thank you. Yeah, what motivated you to attend today's webinar? You could select all that apply. So is it professional development, personal interest, is dairying important in your LGA? and if it will support activities in your organisation, or if there's, if you're looking at land use conflict, or if there's towards dairy industry or is likely to increase in your LGA or something else. Thanks, Helen. Okay, great. So the majority, people are hoping this will be a bit of professional development to find out a bit more about the dairy industry. 43% have said dairy is important in your LGA, so there's a bit of a spread there, and hopefully the information will support your organisation. So thanks very much for those responses. That gives me a bit of an idea going into today's presentation. So thanks, Lillian, for the introduction. My name's Zita Ritchie. I'm based in the New South Wales DPI dairy team on the far north coast of New South Wales. I'm at Wallingbar, which is near Lismore, Ballina area. But just to introduce a bit more about the team, we've actually got a team across the state. So there's 6 of us currently across the state in the Hunter, Central West, and also the South and Camden area as well. And really, as a team, our kind of priorities is delivering industry research, development and adoption programs that are aiming to support the dairy industry. So to become more profitable and remain profitable into the future, build resilience and sustainable in the longer term. So we're working across 3 kind of strategic areas, and really the first one's focused on innovative industry development, and that's, involves things like precision technologies, data analysis, and also partnering with key research institutions such as Sydney University, the Dairy Research Foundation there. We've got a lot of joint research and development programs with them. Also building the business management culture. So my colleague Sheena Carter's leading up the Dairy Business Advisory Unit and focuses on a lot of dairy business support services for farmers, as also analysis and programs and training and resources around that. And the third one is dairy industry sustainability, which has kind of been more my area of focus in the team, and really relevant to today's webinar, I think, as well, because it focuses on land use planning, also climate change risk management, as well as animal welfare, emergency preparedness, and also building industry capability and skills. So it's great to have everyone on today's webinar, and we hope it's useful for you. So just to kind of start with a bit of context, I think, of what the dairy industry in Australia contributes. So it's actually the 4th largest rural industry, and it has a farm gate value of $4.9 billion. So it's a significant industry in Australia. And of that, 4,420 farms contribute towards that value and milk production. So, and we have seen a decline in farm numbers, particularly over the last 2 decades since 2000 with deregulation, and we saw a shift in consolidation of the dairy industry since that time. So consolidation of farms and also processing over that period of time. But even so, with that consolidation, we're still, those 4,400 farms are producing 8.6 billion litres. So it's a huge industry. And of that, we're actually exporting a large proportion of our dairy. So Australia's milk production exceeds the volume required that we need domestically. So an export market is a big focus for our sector. So we're exporting 36%. And then aside from the export, more domestically, closer to home, it is a large employer regionally. So we employ 37,400 people. And of that, about 14,000 are employed directly on farm. And 20,000 are employed in the processing sector. So it plays a really valuable contribution in our communities in New South Wales and across Australia. So touching on the export markets and utilisation, I think of all the dairy that's produced in Australia, 39% of that goes into cheese, 29% is drinking milk, and then we've got smaller proportions of skim milk powder and whole milk powder and other products. And skim milk powder, particularly, and whole milk powder is a big export focus as well. So of our export markets, China, the Greater China region is our biggest market, accounting for 38% of our total exports. But we've also seen a growth in the larger Asian region as well. And we're expecting further growth in that region as we're seeing that growth in the middle class, and the middle class in Asia consuming more dairy products along with more Western diets. So that's a huge opportunity for Australia and continues to grow. So we've got other markets in Asia, including Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. So of the export though, Victoria is the largest contributor to the export of dairy products, and they account for about 77% of the total value that's exported. So a huge proportion. New South Wales less so. So how much do we consume? Just to kind of bring it back to the more individual level, Australia is actually one of the the largest consumers of dairy per capita in the world. And this is largely due to the growing coffee culture that we've seen in Australia. Also a growth in the flavoured milk products as well. We consume quite a fair bit of those. In terms of cheese, it's remained relatively stable, and we consume about 13.4 kilograms per capita per year in Australia, and fresh milk about 94 litres. And to bring it back to the individual level, that's kind of equivalent to just under a 2-litre bottle of milk per person per week. So it's actually quite a lot of milk that we consume overall. So if everyone likes cheese, you probably can relate to that figure there. So to bring it now down to the, I guess, the more regional level for New South Wales, well, first touching on in Australia, dairy is concentrated. I guess the bulk of the milk production is in the subtropical regions of Australia and the temperate zones. So the bulk of our milk production is produced in the southeast of the state, particularly Victoria. And I guess this is because this is the climate and resources that's favourable for dairy production. And in New South Wales, it's actually one of the most diverse states in terms of dairy production, in terms of climate zones. So we've actually got 4 key zones. So you can see in the north east of the state, we've got more of a subtropical coastal environment. Further south, we've got the central temperate zone, and then the south, down near the Bega area, we've got more of that cooler coastal zone as well. And then fourth, we've got the more central dry inland kind of conditions, and where those farms are heavily reliant on irrigation for pasture production for dairying there, whereas the coastal zones are more reliant on rain-fed systems with supplementary irrigation in those dry periods as well. So that kind of gives you a bit of the key features of the industry that we're seeing. In that graph there that shows New South Wales, you can see some black boxes. That indicates where the kind of concentration of processors are across the state. So you can see that they're spread up and down the eastern seaboard, with some located more centrally as well. And I guess what's a key feature of the New South Wales industry is that most of our milk production goes into the fresh liquid milk market. So 60% of that goes into the fresh milk market, and we have a lot of input into meeting the supply and demand across the eastern seaboard. So in some cases, milk can be from the northern part of the state, can go up into markets such as Brisbane, and also down south of Sydney as well, depending where the supply and demand for fresh milk is. So the remaining 40% goes into more processed products like yogurt, cheese, ice cream, and other dairy products. So what's very unique about in New South Wales is really supplying that fresh drinking liquid milk market. So overall, the New South Wales industry is the second largest producer of dairy after Victoria. So we account for 12.5% of the total volume, and has a gross value of 670 million. So it's a really big industry for the state. And of that, it's quite amazing that 494 dairy businesses are contributing to that. So, and we have seen a decline in the number of dairy businesses in New South Wales, which is consistent with what we've seen across Australia. So, for example, we've got 494 farms now, but 10 years ago we had closer to 800. But we've seen that consolidation, but those farms are still, being able to produce 1.1 billion litres of milk in the 21-22 year. So as we've seen that kind of, I guess, consolidation of farm numbers, we have seen a slight increase in herd average size. So the first quiz question said, what's the average herd size of a farm in Australia? And in New South Wales, it's actually 300, and that's fairly consistent with the national average as well. So it's not as large as you think. So I know that the most common answer was 500 cows. So yeah, the average is actually 300. So we're still seeing a lot of family-run businesses. But look, as an example, 10 years ago, the average was 240. So we are seeing that creep because that demand for dairy is still there. So some farm scales are expanding. And on average, a cow produces 6,800 litres per year, and that to make that more of a figure that you can understand, it's about 22 litres per cow per day. So that gives a bit of a snapshot of the New South Wales industry. So the demand for dairy is there. It's a really big contributor in our state. So here's another question for you. So what percentage of Australian dairy farms are family owned? So I gave you the average size before, which is about 300. It'd be interesting to know what people think is what proportion are actually family-owned farms still. So if we're able to pick an answer there, that would be great. That's really, really interesting to see. So well, we gave you 3 options, 50%, 85% or 98%, and the actual answer is 98%. So surprisingly, 98% of farms in Australia are still family owned. So we do have a very small proportion of corporate owned farms, which are often the larger farms. But yeah, look, it goes to show that really most of the farms that are family run businesses. And I guess we're seeing that some of the changes and trends that we're seeing, that as those family businesses grow and expand, you know, to accommodate that shift in scale and size, farmers are having to look for labour to have that additional support and work on farm. So that brings us to the challenges, I guess, currently, and current challenges and trends that the industry is kind of grappling with at the moment. So as I mentioned, we've seen a decline in farm numbers, but with that, we've seen an increase in herd size and scale. Look, consistent across the agricultural sector is that we're seeing a decline in rural populations, and that brings about some issues around labour. So attracting and retaining labour on farm, and then we're seeing competition not only within the agricultural sector for labour, but for other sectors such as labour going to mining or other things. So that is also a challenge for dairy. And the third one, I think, which we're all very much aware of, is kind of managing this inherent climate variability and extreme weather events, which we're seeing more frequent and at higher intensity, and we're likely to see that in the future as well. So I guess with those challenges in mind and trends, farmers are considering investments currently to help manage that risk, and then look at ways that they can improve their infrastructure on farm to remain more profitable into the future and increase their business sustainability. So this is why this talk today is really relevant, to kind of address those key trends and challenges. So some of the characteristics of our farming systems is that we're predominantly pasture-based. So, and that really gives us a competitive advantage, I think, internationally. You know, that we have a climate that we're able to graze, cows are able to graze most of the year in Australia. But in New South Wales, like I mentioned, we've got a very diverse climatic region, and this also dictates the type of systems that farmers are able to operate and run based on their climate and resources available to them. So we've actually kind of classified the feeding systems along a continuum or a scale. So at one end, we've got farms that are grazing all year round, and they've got a really high proportion of directly grazed pasture in the diet. And then when I say 85%, often it's not 100% solely just on pasture, because to meet the cow's energy and protein requirements for milk production, they need to be supplemented with something else, so like a grain or a concentrate. So we've got some farms feeding low to moderate levels of a concentrate or supplement. And then as we move on that continuum, farmers, depending on their region and what's available, in some cases pasture isn't available all year round. So they're looking at options to feed more flexibly to ensure that they can, the cows are fully fed throughout their lactation. So with that, along that continuum, we might see some farms put in or have a feed pad, and you can see a picture there. A feed pad really is just an area that allows the cows to stand, which can be a gravel area or a concrete area with a feed bunker, and that feed, some proportion or a supplement is able to be fed to the cows. That might be hay or silage in that, or some sort of bit of a mixed ration in that bunker there. So they might get that feed before or after milking, or in periods where grass and pasture is not available, particularly with wet weather events that we've seen over the last 12 months and drought or dry conditions, that allows those cows to be fully fed in those conditions where they're not actually able to graze pasture. And then towards the other end, we've got a zero grazing system. So it doesn't mean that cows don't get any pasture. It just means that rather than grazing it directly, that a mixed ration, what we call a total mixed ration, which might include some crop, pasture, hay or silage and a concentrate mix all together, which is fully formulated, is delivered to the cow in more of a house system. And what we're seeing is with New South Wales, given that we've had, you know, more of these extreme events, we're seeing some farms are expanding and growing in size. They're looking at alternative options to kind of accommodate this system level change. And we're seeing more interest into these and trends towards more of a feed pad, inputting in a feed pad, or towards more of a house system. So, and obviously, depending on where farmers sit on this scale, it requires varying levels of infrastructure. And the reasons why farmers might be considering moving towards this system of more zero grazing, it might include things, well, particularly managing heat stress, and it's particularly in the summer months. Grazing during those times can be really difficult for cows, and become quite heat stressed, so that being in a house system actually really alleviates some of that, improving milk production and welfare for the cow. And also particularly during really wet conditions, they can really struggle with mastitis and lameness if they're grazing in those really wet continued periods of wet conditions. And having a standoff area or a feed pad or a house system really manages and improves animal welfare in that instance. So I hope that gives a bit of an overview of the systems there. But apart from the feeding systems, I mean, if farms are looking to reinvest and continue into the longer term to keep up with current technology and reinvest and improve their capital infrastructure, they might be looking at upgrading the dairy plant. So we've got different types of dairy parlours. On the left here, you can see a dairy, it's a herringbone system, which is one of the most common systems that we see in New South Wales, Australia. Where cows kind of come in a line individually. The herringbone, that's kind of the pattern given from the name. And then once they come into the dairy, they're milked, they're given some concentrate often in the dairy, and then they move out of that, and then the next group come in. So that's one system, and farmers might be looking to increase the size or upgrade that. As herds become bigger, some consider or look at putting in a rotary dairy, and this is a dairy that's able to accommodate a larger number of cows and more efficient to milk, and they don't need to be moved out in and out individually into individual stalls like a herringbone, and they kind of move around in a circular motion around a central point on this continuous platform. So yeah, and if farmers looking to put in a rotary that have to, increase, we'll put in a development application potentially, or a look in at different ways to accommodate those upgrades in the dairy plant and equipment. Apart from the dairy and feeding storage infrastructure, there's also farms are just looking at options to provide shade, particularly to alleviate heat stress. So that picture in the middle there is a farm near Port Macquarie, which I visited. And look, the real driver for this farm to put a shed over their holding yard as cows come into the dairy is really just managing the heat stress and humidity in those summer months. So they're able to put in sprinklers and fans, and they're much cooler as they're waiting to be milked in the dairy. And then, as you can see, there's the kind of total mixed ration system on the left-hand side. So there's a number of options that farmers are considering. And with these upgrades, there's also consideration for effluent system design and upgrade. And there's a lot of guidelines and advice out there that farmers are already have, quite well-run effluent systems and reuse systems as well. But with this change and interest in kind of moving down this path of additional infrastructure, there's considerations and upgrades that might be required to effluent as well. So to provide support for successful planning and development, look, farms are requiring development to upgrade and to really manage their risk, and that's why they're kind of considering these upgrades. And interesting to know, I guess, understand also that considering there might not be many dairies in your LGA. So when you see these development applications come through, and they're, understanding that, I guess, having sessions like this is to help you understand the systems better, and also from our side to help support farmers navigate this planning process. We understand that farmers have a lot of challenges with navigating the development application process, different consent authorities and different regulations and requirements they need to meet. So it's really critical that we can help support them when they're considering this investment phase, and also helping to support council with the approvals and understanding where the dairy systems are and what's required. And so this has been recognised as a major challenge for farmers, and not only frustrating for them, but also can cause delays and financial challenges to them. So there's I guess that I'll talk more about projects that we're working on to help address and really make this an easier pathway for them to go down, because we're wanting to support them to develop and improve their systems. So look, I'll pull it up there for a minute and hand it over to Rob Cooper, who's really deeply involved in the dairy industry and is an ex-dairy farmer as well. So Rob, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself and talk about some of the work that we're kind of doing, and then I'll talk more after that about some specific projects that kind of link in that's relevant for people on the meeting today. So thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thanks very much, Zita, for that. Rob Cooper, and I am a dairy farmer. I class myself that way, even though we sold our farm recently. I've invested back in the industry because I think there's a really good future there and long term. And I just really want to thank everyone for getting onto this webinar today. It's really encouraging to see so many people interested in the improving the process and understand the process of dairy farmer trying to grow and develop their farms. And yeah, I just wanted to briefly mention a little bit on the why. Why would you, as a local government area or council area, consider dairy farm developments? And I think we just, Zita's put up some really good statistics there, but I think we've got to look at what dairy farmers offer your local community too. That dairy farmers and their families and employees are very much community focused and offer a tremendous amount to the local community and local area, financially, spending in the local area, supporting local businesses, but also getting involved with, you know, the schools, local groups, community events, and buying from local business. They do offer a lot to the local community, and I think that you really got to remember that when we look at trying to support what the dairy industry is doing. On a farm level, also why dairy farmers are actually looking to develop, and Zita's gone through quite a bit of this, but I just wanted to reinforce it a little bit. They're looking to have a more efficient system, both for long-term profitability, but also to address things like climate change, and also the big focus we've got to remember in a lot of these developments are to address the a better environment or comfort level for the cow. That is the main part of the production system. So a lot of people are putting in facilities, milking facilities to better milk cows, sheds, feeding facilities, upgrading right through their system and this big aim is for better comfort for the cows and also staff. And looking after the staff is a big important part of it. And the other one is adopting new technologies. There's a tremendous amount of technology coming through for the dairy industry, and really helping in all those areas. And yeah, so farmers now are adopting a lot of technology as well. But just going to the Dairy Action Plan, this is a initiative of the New South Wales government, a good initiative. It was done, well, about 3 years ago. It's been a fair bit of work. So one of the initiatives was to put a plan together, and they call it an action plan, to really, the purpose being to set the foundation of a successful and profitable future for the New South Wales dairy industry. For the last 20 years, we had the federal government implement a deregulation from a regulated industry, which was a big change, hard on a lot of all dairy farmers. And then we've had the $1 milk, which most of you will be aware of. It's been a very tough time, and hasn't been much development in the dairy industry, mainly farmers leaving. But now there's better prices. You might see that reflected in the price of milk at the supermarket or where you buy milk from. And the farmers do have money to invest back into their farm system. And so that's what we're trying to encourage right the way through, from development applications right through to getting more people interested in working in the industry. We're doing things on roads and other areas as well. So the main, there was 28 recommendations developed with the plan. So we aren't going to go into all those, but there's 4 main themes. One, there, research, development, extension and adoption. Secondly, to bring confidence back in the industry. So all people can have confidence in investing in the industry, whether it's the local repair, tractor repair person or supply, as well as the farmer and other areas. People have got confidence in the long term. Develop skills and business resilience and stronger future. And so this plan was put together, and it was, as I say, it was a few years ago, or we started it, and it's taken a while to develop, but it's been very instrumental when we had the bushfires and the government wanted to do recovery there. We were able to go with this plan, and they had a clear way to direct that recovery money in the storm and after the flooding, which has been devastating still, even just recently down in the Murray area. Yeah, a lot of devastation for that. The government has been able to put some funds in. They've had a plan of where to spend that money. So that was the first part. After we did the plan, we've got this Dairy Action Plan Implementation Panel, a little bit of a mouthful, which I'm chairing. We've got 15 members, a really good cross-section of the industry involved with it. And so we've got, the government's made the plan, or we've made the plan in consultation with the government. They've put the money in. We've developed fair activities and projects, which is happening. A lot of projects are happening, including what is part of today. There's been reports done, many more to come. And the main one is delivery back to make action happen. And that is really important of any plan, really, to get action on the farm level, in the community, right the way through. So 3 examples of recommendations that relate to dairy developments. I'll just quickly read them. Recommendation 19, and these are just abbreviation of the recommendation, but the dairy industry needs are considered through the New South Wales Agriculture Commissioner's Agricultural Land Use Planning Strategy, and that's an initiative that's coming today, really. Recommendation 20, develop resources to assist in navigating farm development approval process. And yeah, really, as I said, the last 20 years, there hasn't been much development. So we've sort of been, a lot of the planners and processes and approving developments has sort of been lost a little bit. So we're trying to gear that up again. And their recommendation 21, review the planning rules to reduce red tape related to infrastructure for milking, feeding and housing dairy cows to provide certainty to invest in technologies. So there's various projects happening with each of these recommendations, and I just encourage you to have a look at the Dairy Action Plan, and there'll be links for that. But as I said, there hasn't been much development over the last 20 years. A few things here and there, but now many farmers, I think there's 6 new dairies going in over the state. I know some large investments have been looked at in several millions of dollars, and not insignificant amounts. But there's also small projects where a farmer wants to get his effluent system right, or do a bit of shade for his cows, or be able to just supplement the cows in a flooding or fire time, so they're looked after a lot better. Yeah, so I think that's sort of all I had to say. But yeah, just in summary, very keen to try and help local government areas, the councils, to encourage development. We're here to help both the government in various departments, but also the action plan. You know, we could come and talk to a local council, see what, you know, and just do a brief report on what dairy farming and dairying can offer the local area, in your area, and how you may be able to encourage that in the future. Thanks, Zita.
Thanks a lot, Rob. That was a really great overview. And like Rob mentioned, as part of the broader action plan, we've got a number of recommendations and projects that are trying to address those recommendations. And I just wanted to pull out 3 key projects really that we're working on in collaboration with the land use planning team, which are most relevant, well, to everyone on this call today. But just to start with, so us in the dairy team, we've partnered on a lot of number of programs and projects. I just wanted to highlight a few. So we've got the Dairy Up program, which is a 5-year research development program, partnering with the Dairy Research Foundation and a number of other partners. It's got a lot of different projects in here focused on de-risking the industry and improving productivity, and looking at new and emerging markets as well. We've got a couple of big projects that continued in the team, focused on farm business, which I mentioned earlier. We've got the Dairy Farm Monitor project, which is run by Sheena Carter. And that's looking at financial and physical performance of the dairy industry year after year for New South Wales. And we survey about 40 farms every year. And also, I'll give you a link to the Business of Dairy podcast at the end of the presentation, but each month we have a new episode looking at different aspects of the dairy business in case you wanted to hear different stories from farmers and other industry representatives. But also more recently, quite currently, we've got funding from the Storm and Flood Industry Recovery Program, and this is a big package of work, involves 3 programs and 12 projects over the next 2 years to really support dairy industry flood recovery. And within this, we've been able to build projects that are linked to the recommendations in the action plan. And a few key projects really are linked to planning and promoting the value of the dairy industry. So I just wanted to highlight 3 of these projects, which I think have a lot of relevance for those that have dialed in today. So the first one is the Dairy Environmental Management Guidelines. So currently, DPI have environmental guidelines that have been published through DPI, and they're 12 years old. So we've just commenced this piece of work, working with the land use planning team and a consultant over the next 12 months to really update these guidelines to make sure that they reflect the changes that we're seeing in farm practices and environmental reforms. We want to make sure that the guidelines are there to kind of guide farmers if they're considering new developments, and the steps to go through with the development application process, but also making sure that they comply with the New South Wales requirements, so environmental and planning requirements. And also to mention that Dairy Australia have just put out, or soon to be putting out, the national guidelines around feed pad and intensive systems. So we want to make sure that the New South Wales guidelines also align to what's kind of published as best practice nationally as well. And through this process, over the next 12 months, we'll be working really closely with stakeholders, so including local councils like yourself, farmer groups and dairy industry representatives, because we want to make sure that the guidelines capture everything that we need to be kind of there in future to be able to refer to, and to help guide farmers go through this planning process, and for consultants as well that are assisting dairy farmers to go through these application processes. So look, if there's any feedback from you into these guidelines, if you've actually come across them before or not, it'd be really welcome your feedback on this. So welcome to contact us at the end of this session. But as part of this, also a piece of work, we'll be looking to update the planning definitions for dairy. So we want to make sure that these definitions, are they current? Do they reflect current practices? Questions like, is the designated development threshold appropriate? Is there any issues around this? So we'll actually be working through this guidelines process to look at the planning definitions as well. The second project is the education component. So out of the Ag Commissioner's report, there's a recommendation in there that we're looking at delivering education programs to work with councils. And I guess this is an element of that today, but for the dairy industry, we're looking, the land use planning team through Lillian and Celine will be looking at further training that's made available for councils on the dairy industry, and particularly as the environmental guidelines are updated and reviewed, we'll be looking to build that into some of the education around that as well. But aside from the planning side of things, a colleague of mine, Jess Bell, as part of that Storm and Industry Flood Recovery Program over the next 2 years, is working on a really great piece of work around promoting the ongoing value of the dairy industry in New South Wales. So if there's opportunities in your LGA to support community events or promotion of dairy through schools or other community events in your region, please reach out to us. that kind of program is going to be supported for the next 2 years. So those photos show that recently Jess was at the Robertson show giving talks on the dairy industry. You can see, you know, examples of milking cows and different aspects of dairy for school kids. So there's opportunities that we can build into your region. If there's opportunities there, please let us know. And the third project, which is actually a really exciting piece of work, it's called the Navigating Farm Development Project. And in Victoria, they've had a spatial kind of web-based tool where farmers can go in, type in their address and pull up their kind of farm on a map and look at where spatially different, I guess, some of the planning requirements and kind of guiding them through a process to undergo development. And we're looking at building a similar thing in New South Wales. And this is, I guess, that's trying to solve this problem that we're facing, that farmers are wanting to develop their land, but they're finding it difficult to understand and comply with the farm planning development requirements. So over the next year or two, this project will be working with really understanding the key issues for dairy, working with industry, working with kind of web-based solutions to try and build an appropriate tool to help guide and navigate farmers through this process. So that project's even just kicking off today. Through the New South Wales DPI. So you can get in touch with the land use planning team if you want to find out more about that. But this will be a great tool to build not only for dairy, but with piloting with 2 industries, so dairy and horticulture as well. And really that's kind of come out of the storm and flood recovery funding as well, just trying to help accelerate the recovery from those events to improve, planning decisions for farmers and to improve profitability going forward. So they're the 3 real key projects that I just want to highlight that I think are most relevant for local councils. And look, please, we do a broad range of work in the team across the state. So we've got a number of resources if you're wanting to find out a bit more about the dairy industry or any more information that you'd like, please contact us. My email's there, or we've got a generic email account that one of us will get to and get back to you. We've got a DPI dairy newsletter that comes out quarterly. We've got the podcast. You can click on that QR code if you want to just get it up now, you're welcome to. We've got a Facebook page, and also what might be of interest also for local councils is that we run quarterly dairy breakfast webinars. So similar to what we had today, we run a kind of short, sharp session for service providers on different topics based on the season, really just to improve capacity and capability and knowledge across the dairy service provider sector in New South Wales. So you'd be more than welcome to join those webinars. You can email me or that other email there I can put you on the mailing list when the next one comes up. But aside from those contacts, here's the ag land use planning team. And so please feel free, Lillian mentioned before, particularly around the guidelines, the education program or Navigating Farm Developments project, please contact them. And there's also an ideas wall that they've got there. There's a link there. So if there's any ideas that you want for the paddock to plate planning future, please feel free to get in touch with us. But that really brings us to the end of the presentation. We've got about 10 minutes to go, but Lillian, I'll hand back to you. And I think you've got 2 poll questions there. We would really appreciate kind of a bit of feedback, and also for next session, I guess really interested to know, I know that some of you said you had limited knowledge at the start. Do you feel like you've got a bit more knowledge after today's session? Or not? And that feedback's really good for us. So if you're able to answer that question, and then we'll ask another one about what you might like, topics that you might like in future.
Thank you very much, Zita.
Thanks, Lillian.
And Rob. It's been wonderful to have that really current picture of what's happening in the dairy industry. We'll just finish with these couple of polls. We've got one there. Have you improved your knowledge? And we'll just wait for the results. Yep, so that's great. Looks like a really nice improvement. Very good. Thank you, Zita. I think that's been wonderful. And we have another question now just about what other sorts of agricultural industries that you might like to hear something about in the future, in the same sort of a webinar arrangement. So if you could just tick any box that you think would be appropriate for the future. Give you a couple of minutes on that. So we've just got about 10 minutes left. Anyone got any particular questions in the chat? I'll hand over to Selena Stillman, who's also in the land use planning team, just to help us through facilitating those questions. Thanks, Selena.
Thanks, Lillian. Yeah, we're just starting to get a couple of questions in the chat now. So first question there is, what is driving increased investment in dairying, and is this simply increased demand? Would you like to address that, Zita? Or
I can have a go, and then Rob, you can. I mean, I guess there's a lot of different reasons. Like Rob mentioned, I think the sentiment out in industry at the moment is quite positive, that farmers have a lot of confidence. I think the demand is still strong for dairy, definitely, but I think having more confidence and with the high milk prices gives farmers that confidence to want to reinvest. And I think, yeah, I guess there's different drivers in different regions as well about where, I mean, some farms, I guess depending on what their future is looking like, some farms have children coming onto the farm, and for that reason, or younger generation coming through, and that giving them that kind of motivation reason to wanting to increase that investment to give the opportunity for the next generation to come in as well. But Rob, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, just a couple of things. You know, there is a good demand for milk and milk products, and I just got to remember that dairy does, even though there's milk alternatives coming out, dairy does supply a big part of the world's nutrition overall. I saw a presentation recently that dairy supplies about 10–12% of nutrition worldwide, but in some of the nutrients like calcium, that 10% provides 45% of the world's calcium. So even though there's alternatives out there, dairy long term is going to provide food for locally and for the world. So that's important, that dairy farmers have a long-term look when they invest. But there's things like, yep, we're getting a better return for our milk now after $1 milk's finished. So we've got some surplus cash to invest. People want to make a better system for the cow comfort for people. But also, as everyone knows, inflation's increasing, the cost price squeeze. To actually continue on as a profitable industry, we need to keep investing as well. So to just keep that profit line in the black, really. So there's a few things driving it.
Yeah, to drive that efficiency. Yeah, thanks, Rob.
I think can't see any more questions there, but if anyone wanted to take the floor and put their hand up for a question.
While that comes, I'll just make a comment. You know, in the local area, in the Tamworth area, and yeah, just if anyone's got any questions with your planning or developments, get in touch. We can go and have a look at a dairy farm, explain to you the new technologies. I've had an example recently where a group was taken out on farm, and they just didn't realise what farmers were trying to achieve, because and yeah, there's a lot of things to learn, and it will be a bit of an eye opener if you're having trouble understanding dairy farm development and what's happening out on the farm. Just ask, please, and we'll try and help you through that process.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. We've got another question here from Madison. It was noted that a cow can make approximately 22 litres of milk per day, which I thought was a really interesting figure as well. How much of this goes to waste versus the milk and products?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have a figure off the top of my head, but Sheena or Rob might have an idea of percentage wasted.
Cow produces 22 litres, like from our farm. That 22 litres or truckload, when it gets, it's 100% goes into the cartons. There's no real wastage. The only wastage would be if people don't buy it at the supermarket level or the shop level, and it goes to use past date. I wouldn't have a figure on that, but I think it's very, very little. But if anyone else has got any comment, but basically along the processing chain, there is no loss. Yeah.
Jess, you might have a comment about that. I saw you take yourself off mute.
Yeah, thanks, Zita. Hi, everyone. Jess Bell from the dairy team. I was just going to add to Rob there and say, yes, for the majority of the milking herd, there wouldn't be wastage on farm until production. probably the only exception to that would be a fresh cow, so a recently calved cow. Her initial production is colostrum, so that would be fed to the calves retained on farm. So that might be sort of a little bit dependent on the animal, but between 3 and 5 days, you would keep her milk out of the main herd or the vat, and then from that point, unless there was a major cooling issue or issue on farm, once that milk is in the vat, the whole lot of it goes to the processor.
The only other one is if an animal, a cow, is being treated for a illness like mastitis, they'll have an antibiotic, and that obviously that milk won't be shipped. That will be wasted. Sometimes it can be fed to a calf or a beef animal. But we're trying to minimise that. And that comes back to our developments. We have good developments where cows are nice and healthy and perform well, are comfortable, don't have illness.
Okay, thanks. Thanks again to Jess and Rob. The next question is there funds in the flood recovery program for on-ground grazing land management changes? That's for farmers directly. Might be one for Zita.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by on-ground management changes, but I think in terms of flood recovery, yes, we have had a lot of funds, particularly in the dairy industry, for one-on-one support for recovery around, I guess, whole business recovery. So we've had one-to-one visits from consultants, which will be focusing on improving their pasture recovery, the feed base, getting the business back on track, because a lot of feed was damaged, a lot of paddocks were damaged during floods. So yes, there has been fun through the early needs, it's called the Early Needs Recovery Package, which has been supported by the local land services. So there has been one-on-one support as well as other more group support as well to provide that service with recovery. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I noticed there's a question before that too, Selena, above that one.
Before that one. Oh, sorry. Yes. So livestock is considered to be adding to the greenhouse methane emissions. What is the strategy considered by the dairy industry to deal with this issue?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. So this is becoming, it's very very prominent globally, not just for Australia, around what dairy's contribution is to greenhouse gas emissions and how we're best managing that moving forward as well. And look, there are a number of strategies that farmers can do, and there's kind of 6 action areas. And I think to start with, I think the methane story is better in the context of if you're improving your efficiency through increased development and improving feeding efficiency particularly, so increased energy and protein in the diet, you're actually reducing the methane per litre of milk as well. So if farmers are doing best practice, they're actually reducing their methane and greenhouse gas emissions per unit of output as well. So that's an easier win to focus on, but there is a lot of research and development happening in Australia. So we're looking at ways that we can support farmers to look at reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, but while also maintaining productivity. So whilst acknowledging cows, do have most of the methane on farm is from livestock themselves, there's research happening around feed additives. Also, we get a small proportion of methane from effluent ponds. So looking at ways that we might be able to capture that methane, particularly for larger farms on the effluent ponds, reuse it for biogas or different things. So there's a number of strategies being considered. From the department within DPI and also for Dairy Australia through research. So we are supporting the industry through that. And it's just going to be one of those, I guess, step change things that we've got to work together about how we can address that issue globally. But I think bringing it back down to that, reducing emissions actually occurs through improving productivity. So that's really the message that we're trying to work with farmers, and by, I guess, doing an environmental carbon footprint to start with, using a baseline and where we can go from there.
Great. And we're starting to get close to 11 o'clock, so I'll just do a couple more questions. But then, if people have other questions or things that, feel free to put things in the ideas wall, and particularly if you've got specific information that or topics that you'd like more information on, we can provide further details as we go through to the into the education program. So just a question there might be for you, Rob. Do dairy producers get more money for milk when consumers buy branded milk such as Norco than non-branded milk?
It's a big topic. Trying to work out the difference. Dairy farmers get paid a blended price over the what goes into the supermarkets and what goes into branded stuff. Generally, they will get a better return if everyone bought branded stuff instead of the supermarket, but that's not going to happen. You know, as dairy farmers, we do want to give the consumer a good value product. But yeah, if you can buy branded, especially, you know, there's several smaller local dairy production processing plants and support those. Yeah, definitely.
Great, thanks, Rob. And we'll just do one final question. What are the current thoughts on supporting upgrades to dairy infrastructure on high hazard flood prone land?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky question. Maybe the land use planning team might be able to chip in with that too. But I think there's a lot of considerations. That's interesting you mentioned that, because I'm based on the far north coast near Lismore, and a couple of farms are considering putting in raised feed pads or flood mounds after the floods. And look, I think as a risk management strategy, I think, and there's also farms in the Hunter that have done this, so raised their feed pads up a certain level to ensure that it's above the flood height. So I think as that's a reasonable strategy for a lot of farmers, but I think it probably comes back to, well, the individual case. So how much above the previous flood it was and what the future risk might be. And it's a big capital investment. So I guess it's making that individual call and looking at, well, longer term, where's the farm going to be, and is it better to be investing on that site or moving elsewhere into, you know, moving the farm into a more appropriate area or something. So it's a really difficult question to answer, and I think that really is an individual case basis to where the farm is, what resources and have, and what their future might be. Rob, you might want to mention anything else, or?
Well, just quickly, this is some of the issues that we're grasping with and trying to help with on the development process, you know, and make good decisions for the long term. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a very topical point at the moment. Yeah, I think post floods, yeah, farmers are looking at, okay, what can I do to help manage that risk into the future if we're going to get future flooding events like what we had. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much everyone for joining today, and to Zita and Rob for their presentations and for answering all these questions. We're really just on 11 o'clock now. Just a couple of things, where our next paddock to planning forum will be held on the 4th of May, and the topic will be strategic planning. And we've seen the ideas for our next industry webinar, so we'll work on them for later in the year. If you didn't have the opportunity to speak today or raise an issue, please go to that ideas wall and give us your issues or comments, and we'll take them into account. We'll also be sending out a feedback form. We'd like to ask a few questions about how you felt the day went and what other issues might be coming up. And if you want to be involved with any of the projects discussed today, please get in contact with us at the Ag Land Use Planning team or with the dairy team, and we'll be sending out the contact details again, and the presentation and the recording will go up on the pinpoint page hopefully in the next day or so. So I want to thank you all very much for attending. It's really great to see so many interested people, and we hope we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.